Warning. Before watching this video, I like to note that I will be using text-to-speech as my dialogue because I'm preventing sharing my own voice for personal reasons. Enjoy. Opening Cartoon Network was my favorite channel growing up, and it's mainly through the programming they've aired over the decades, especially their originals. So today, I will be reviewing and ranking each individual shows. In general, rather than each individual episode, because that would make the video too long, like lasting days long, which I don't think my PC could handle. I won't be using much clips from each series to prevent my videos from getting blocked. What a cartoon. Here we have what could be considered to be one of the first Cartoon Network shows, and the first one that isn't just recycled clips, whether they'd be dubbed with new audio or have dated CGI interstitials. What we have here is just a pilot showcase series that includes a bunch of 3 7-minute shorts making for a full-length episode, made by young creators starting in the animation industry. Only a couple of them got a chance to become full series. And some of the first cartoons. Fred Siebert of Frederator Studios, who previously worked on MTV and Nick's branding, and was the president of Hanna-Barbera at the time, was responsible for developing this series. This won't be the last time we hear of him for this network, because he will return 15 years later, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Onwards to the first series CN picked up from this. In promotional material, this went by World Premiere Tunes. Dexter's Laboratory / Dial M for Monkey, The Justice Friends. Here's the first true cartoon. Created by Gendy Tartakovsky, this series follows a self-proclaimed boy genius named Dexter, who owns a gigantic laboratory inside his room, often trying to keep it a secret from his parents, one-up his rival Mandark, and most importantly, trying to get his stupid sister Dee Dee out of his lab. This and a few other shows kept the 3 7-minute segment format that What a Cartoon had. I can see why this got picked up for its own show. This show ruled. I used to watch it all the time whenever it would play on Cartoon Network's sister channel, Boomerang, which used to rerun older shows, including ones from Cartoon Network itself, which is why I know a lot about some of these older shows. I even had the first season on DVD. Earlier Season 1 episodes had this style akin to the Dumb and Dumber animated series Hanna-Barbera previously made, but the style evolved to its very own by the end of Season 1. Seasons 3 and 4, however, just look like Clone High. Not only did this show focus on Dexter and his day-to-day life, but we also get to focus on his pet Monkey, and his secret life as an intergalactic superhero. This was before Phineas and Ferb did a similar thing with Perry, except the episodes never really go back and forth between the regular Dexter stuff and the Monkey stuff. Nor does Monkey's superhero antics really interact with Dexter's dilemma. These segments are placed right in the middle of 2 Dexter adventures, and aren't the only ones that do that. There's also another superhero set of shorts that would air in between the Dexter ones, and they would involve the normal everyday lives of 3 superheroes, each parodying a Marvel character, living in an apartment together. It's just as silly as it sounds, complete with canned laughter. Major Glory, who is Dexter's idol outside of these, being the straight man of the group, with Val being the cool slacker, and Krunk being the comedy relief. These guys would later appear in an episode of the Powerpuff Girls, mocking them. As the show went on, these segments would slowly be phased out, with more Dexter segments. By Seasons 3 and 4, they're gone entirely. Season 3 in particular had shorts focusing on characters in Dexter's life, like his dad, or his mom, or his dad again, or Dee Dee, or his dad again, or Mandark, or both his parents. There was even an unreleased episode where the characters swear, in bleeps of course, because Cartoon Network was initially a channel for animation fans of all ages, compared to Nickelodeon, who's primarily aimed at kids. Later on, the channel would focus more on kids during the 2000s, but became all ages again during the early 2010s, with it focusing more on kids again by the end of the decade, and to this day. Anyways, that episode was initially said to be a rumor, until Adult Swim released it on their website for a bit, before rudely removing it. Overall, this was a good series to start on. It's not the greatest thing Cartoon Network has to offer, but it's still very good. Johnny Bravo. This is a series that Cartoon Network hardly ever acknowledges these days, mainly because the main character often seeks women, though they're forgetting the other aspect about him, that he's a loser, and the women are justified for disliking him, and are even shown to be stronger than him, like he could get punched in the shin, briefly float in the air a bit, before landing on that said shin without breaking any of his teeth, but his sunglasses he cannot be seen without gets a bit bent. Dude still lives with his mom. While I don't approve of sexual harassment, it works for this show, as it's actually funny, which isn't usual for a project that has both Butch Hartman and Seth MacFarlane working on it. Then you remember that it was Van Partible who created the show. I'd honestly take it over how a certain other Cartoon Network show does it. Season 1 has this 70s Hanna-Barbera throwback style to it, though with a 90s twist. This series is notable for its usage of smear frames whenever Johnny moves. This show also had a bunch of Hanna-Barbera characters. Like one of the most memorable episodes of the show was a Scooby-Doo crossover. This led to Cartoon Network making a few crossover shorts involving the Scooby Gang going on a date, such as Johnny dating Velma, despite him not being interested in her in the episode itself, and even Ed going on a date with Daphne. Seasons 2 and 3 changes up the art style and tone of the series a bit, using more of a sharp angular art style, making it more UPA-like. Johnny also becomes a lot dumber in this era of the show. Rather than just playing off his mother and little Susie, Johnny also gets to interact with 2 other characters introduced in this era, Pop and Carl. Carl in particular is voiced by Tom Kenny, who voices many other characters in older CN shows from the 90s and 2000s, with this character nearly sounding like SpongeBob. This show also had a 4th season, but I'm just gonna end things here. Overall, another good series from CN, though Dexter still tops the ranking so far. Cow and Chicken / I Am Weasel. At first glance, you might think these are blatant rip-offs of Ren and Stimpy, but I think they stand on their own. David Feiss's art style stands out compared to anything Hanna-Barbera had produced before, and these shows are the reason why it's so recognizable. You can tell that going through this list, a lot of these earlier shows get progressively more and more slapstick involved to them, really embracing the cartoon aspect of Cartoon Network. These series, leaning a bit more into gross-out territory without being too disgusting. These shows have lots of butts in them. Cow and Chicken focuses on the titular animals whose names are just named after said animals who casually just lives with parents who are just human legs and go to school together, and often encountering the devil, referred to as the Red Guy, in his many disguises. At times, Cow even turns into her alter ego, Super Cow, a Spanish-speaking superhero. The theme song implies that the mom gave birth to a cow and a chicken, but I'd rather not think too much about it. Am Weasel, on the other hand, which started off as segments in the previous series before getting its own, focuses on two other animals, though what's different is that they're portrayed as adults rather than children. Here we get to see the titular weasel, who lives a very successful life, while IR Baboon's just a bum, no pun intended, who easily gets jealous. The Red Guy is also a recurring character in this show as well. Although these shows might not be as good as Dexter or Johnny Bravo, they still have a lot of neat aspects about them. The Powerpuff Girls franchise, the final series to be produced by Hanna-Barbera, and possibly Cartoon Network's biggest hit so far. Like with Cow and Chicken, the theme song explains the origins of the main characters, only partially, what the show is about, and what you're going to be into. Unlike the previous shows, the series is formatted with two 11-minute segments within a full-length episode, with the occasional full-length 22-minute episodes, most of which are from Season 4. This will be the primary format for most comedy-driven Cartoon Network shows going forward. The series follows three young superhero girls, called the Powerpuff Girls, who were created in a lab by accident, who have dedicated their lives to fighting crime and trying to save the world. This group typically consists of Blossom, the commander and leader, Bubbles, the joy and the laughter, and Buttercup, the toughest fighter. Each of them have their own little quirks. Blossom's is having either ice breath or heat breath depending on the temperature. Bubbles is the ability to talk in different languages, including animals. And Buttercup's is just curling her tongue, which nobody else in the city of Townsville is able to do. Aside from the main trio, there are two other known Powerpuff Girls in the original series. Bullet, who is just a squirrel that was given Chemical X, and resembles the girls. She only appears twice. And Bunny, an attempt made by the girls to create a fourth member, who has one of the most tragic deaths in any cartoon, self-destructing at the end of her debut episode. Even the narrator was sobbing. Other allies of the girls include their father, Professor Utonium, their kindergarten teacher, Ms. Keene, the mayor, and even Ms. Bellum, who acts more mature and responsible than the mayor does. Then there are the many villains of the show, but I'll go over some of the most notable ones. Mojo Jojo is not only the main antagonist of the series, but he is also responsible for the girls' creation as well. There's also him, which is basically the third time in a row that Cartoon Network made a show involving the devil, as well as Fuzzy Lumpkins, the redneck stereotype. Other villains includes the Gangrene Gang, a group of green-skinned humanoids, Princess Morbucks, a rich brat who wants to obtain the power of the Powerpuffs, the Amoeba Boys, a group of giant germs who are barely harmful, Sudoka, who doesn't appear as often as the other villains, and the Rowdy Rough Boys, who are essentially the evil male versions of the Powerpuffs, also made by Mojo, using Snips, Tails, and Puppy Dog tails in addition to some Chemical X, and later resurrected by him after they self-destruct in their first appearance. And that's not even all of them. Despite the series being marketed to girls, mainly through its merchandise, the series is still enjoyable for a male audience too. In fact, this series was created by a male, named Craig McCracken, who'd later work on another Cartoon Network series near the end of this series' run. That's why for a show about girls, it doesn't pull any punches when it comes to its fighting, which can get pretty gruesome at times. The intro even has blood in it. The series was so popular that it spawned a movie that expands on the origins of the girls established back in Season 1, which was a box office bomb as it released the same day as Men in Black 2. The reviews for it are just ridiculous. That Mr. Enter made a whole video where he reads them. There was also an anime made from this series too that takes place in an alternate universe. The girls aren't even sisters anymore. The original series got so popular in Japan that it spawned a magical girl series akin to the likes of Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura. This anime never aired in the United States. It would also spawn a reboot that would premiere in 2016. That's just boring at best, but really abysmal at worst. This is what I consider to be Cartoon Network's worst series ever, but not the entire franchise, however. If you want reboots that are actually good, there's always Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated or the Looney Tunes show. Heck, even the DuckTales reboot did what the Powerpuff Girls reboot should have done, actually being passionate about the source material, but instead we got corporate slop with some creeps involved. It's not the only show to premiere that year that was worked on by creeps, unfortunately. There was also a CW series that was planned, but luckily, it never saw the light of day. So once again, the day was saved, thanks to Warner Brothers Discovery. I shouldn't be praising them. What the heck? While I would have ranked the original series over Johnny Bravo and maybe even Dexter's Laboratory, the reboot unfortunately drags the whole franchise down. Overall, the franchise is going right in the middle of the list, right over I Am Weasel. Ed and Eddy. I don't think this show has aged all too well. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the other previous Cartoon Network shows had some dated aspects to them, but looking back on this series is just kind of awkward. It's the first cartoon to not be produced by Hanna-Barbera, but instead, AKA Cartoons, which is why the animation in the show looks a bit more fluid, as well as the squiggly outlines that I doubt was cheap to animate. It's also notable for using cells longer than any other CN series, not giving into digital ink and paint until the Christmas special in 2004, even though the intro uses it already. Even though many of my first introductions to the previous 5 series one talked about came from reruns on Boomerang. This one was one of the few older shows that was still airing reruns on the main network in the early 2010s, though it's usually the first 4 seasons, and sometimes the specials on certain occasions. The titular characters consist of the dumb one, the smart one, and the greedy one, as they put their heads together in trying to make scams in the cul-de-sac in order to buy abnormally huge jawbreakers, though their plans usually fail. It follows a similar formula to Pinky and the Brain, and even the Plankton episodes of SpongeBob, though just a bit more frustrating. The first 4 seasons take place during the summer, a seemingly endless summer that is, just like Phineas and Ferb, years later. While the rest of the series takes place in different seasons, with the characters going to school in season 5. Not sure if Phineas and Ferb's revival series will go that direction. I can see why a lot of people like this show. It's got the most slapstick out of any Cartoon Network series thus far, about on par with Tom and Jerry's. And the sound design uses a bunch of random noises, rather than the typical Hanna-Barbera ones. Also, characters like Ed, Rolf, and especially Plank have a lot of funny one-liners like. But that's where the positivity for this show ends, since this show can be quite mean-spirited a lot. But the worst aspect about the series has to do with the Kanker sisters. Whenever they appear in an episode, usually near the end, you can feel a sense of dread injected into your body, as they maliciously torment the Eds with their constant harassment and get away with it. Like I mentioned before, it works for Johnny Bravo as he gets what he deserves, and never understands what he does is wrong. But here the Kankers know what they're doing is wrong, and never really get any comeuppance, except maybe twice. I do think the Eds deserve a bit of punishment, mostly Eddy, but this is just too much. The Eds work a lot better when they're trying to rival Kevin or Sarah. I also really dislike the fans who ship these two trios together, even some that miss the point of their whole dynamic. I think that's mainly through the Valentine's Day episode, as well as the school dance episode, though I'd consider them to be the worst episodes of the series. I personally find this show to be one of the most overrated series to come out of Cartoon Network. I think the show 15 years down the line does a better job portraying the essence of childhood wonder. Bottom of the list. Mike, Lou, and Og. Can't say the show is any better. Here we have the first obscure Cartoon Network show ever, and I can see why so many people don't remember this show. Usually Cartoon Network shows are fast-paced, often catching you off guard with their witty humor. This series' pacing is slower than Lou's pet turtle, Lancelot. There's not a lot to talk about in regards to this series. It has aged the worst out of all the 90s cartoons. But for those who still enjoyed it, I appreciate your opinion. Courage the Cowardly Dog. On the exact same night that the previous series premiered, Courage premiered too, and it feels right at home with the other cartoons. Yet again, the intro explains what the show is about. This show leans a bit into horror, but also has a bit of heart and a bit of slapstick too. This was the final cartoon to be picked up from the What a Cartoon series, and since the Powerpuff Girls was Hanna-Barbera's last outing, this series was instead produced by Stretch Films, John R. Dilworth's own independent studio. They previously worked on some Cartoon Network idents previous to this series. This also marks the first fully digitally inked and painted series, as most shows going forward would use this method. Like with Ed and Eddy, this show was still airing reruns on the main network when I was younger. However, it was also airing on Boomerang too. Years after the series ended, Asian Places got an exclusive Courage special done in CGI, and more recently, there was a Scooby-Doo crossover direct-to-DVD film a few years back. This pairing is a no-brainer, even back in the day. This series is a good way to end the 90s set of cartoons. Let's just hope the following decade is more consistent in quality, but I doubt it. Sheep in the Big City. We start off the new millennium with an obscure show, except this one's actually quite decent. Compared to Mike, Lou, and Og, I find this series to be a lot more memorable and funnier in comparison. The basic premise of this series follows a sheep named Sheep, who is on the run from the military, which is just as unhinged as it sounds. Like the Powerpuff Girls, this show uses a narrator, except we can actually see them. It's also the first Cartoon Network series to have episodes that last the full 22 minutes runtime, instead of being split into 2 or 3 segments. This would typically be used in more action-oriented programs, which there are none so far, unless you consider the Powerpuff Girls as one, though I view it as more of a comedy that happens to have a lot of action in it. I keep mentioning the Powerpuff Girls here, but I actually owned a Powerpuff Girls DVD when I was younger that included the pilot of this series. The angry scientist lives rent-free in my head. Also, I recognize Mo Willem's art style from that old Quick Draw McGraw short that used to always air on Boomerang. Time Squad. The most notable thing about this show is that it's the first fully produced series by Cartoon Network Studios outside of Hanna-Barbera. Other than that, it's nothing too special. This is like the second obscure show in a row. If you really enjoy history lessons, you'd get a kick out of this series. Samurai Jack, Seasons 1 to 4. This series is an odd one to include here because Cartoon Network themselves never really acknowledges the series anymore, ever since it moved to Adult Swim to air its final season over a decade after its initial run. That's mainly because Season 5 contains stuff that would have never made it onto the main channel. That's not what we're here to talk about today. Here we have Genndy Tartakovsky's second Cartoon Network series, following the titular samurai named Jack, who was sent to a dystopian future by the evil Aku, Cartoon Network's third devil-like character. Always thought Jack heavily resembled Professor Utonium when I was younger. This being the first hit series to ever come out of the 2000s for CN, lasting 4 seasons rather than 2 like the previous 2000 shows did, and never got a proper conclusion until years later. But that's a story for whenever I make an Adult Swim video, which is never. This was Cartoon Network's first attempt at doing an action show, as well as their first serialized one, complete with full-length 22-minute episodes. I like my plots extra thick, please. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy / Evil Con Carne. Much like Cow and Chicken and I Am Weasel, here's another batch of shows made by one creator, this time being Maxwell Adams, that were initially grouped together in one series before splitting into their own individual show, with one absolutely being more popular than the other. The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy focuses on the 3 titular characters as they go through wacky and spooky adventures, as the title suggests. After failing a game of limbo, the Grim Reaper has to spend the rest of eternity with both Billy and Mandy, though mostly Billy as a lot of episodes focuses on him, and his house appears in about pretty much every episode. Despite being fairly episodic, the show does have its own continuity. The double-length episode, Keeper of the Reaper, is notable for calling back previous events that happened previously in the series, as well as being the introduction to Fred Fredburger, a character who would briefly become Cartoon Network's mascot for a year. Although Billy and Mandy became really popular, Evil Carne never really did, though that could be because it had a slightly more adult tone. That series proved to be so unpopular that General Scar would later be reused as a recurring character in Billy and Mandy, and even a playable character in the Nintendo Wii launch title game. I once caught a segment of this on the Cartoon Planet block Cartoon Network used to have. The franchise would end in 2008, with the Underfist Halloween special, using a slightly different art style compared to the original series. Like with Courage and Ed and Eddy, this show also had reruns going into the early 2010s. Overall, a pretty solid franchise. Finally, something that tops Dexter. Whatever happened to Robot Jones? Now we're back to another obscure series, following the life of a robot who wants to fit in with the human kids at school. Ironically, this show doesn't really fit in with most other CN originals. Nickelodeon's My Life as a Teenage Robot would do the exact same thing just a year later, but it's more interesting due to its superhero gimmick. Over the years since it ended, the series has gained a cult following, though I kind of find it boring. Codename Kids Next Door. We've reached the Spy Kids era that lasted about a decade, truly a product of its time. This show follows a team of 5 secret agent kids that have a giant Treefort headquarters, who have a grudge against adults, who are this show's villains, as well as teenagers too. Despite being one of their more popular shows during the 2000s, this one is just okay. Don't get me wrong, but this is the type of show you'd get more enjoyment out of as a kid, but find some sort of appreciation for it as an adult, ironically enough. This would be Cartoon Network's first series that starts off having episodes, or in this show's case, operations, be self-contained but would later form a larger narrative as it went on, something that would become really common in cartoons since the 2010s. This is one of the rare instances where Cree Summer, best known for voicing Susie from the Rugrats franchise, and Cleo from Clifford the Big Red Dog, voices a character in a Cartoon Network series. Here she voices Number 5, the fan-favorite character I guess, whose role in the group is being the chill, yet responsible one. You don't hear her voice as often in more recent shows. Other members of the Kids Next Door, specifically Sector V, includes Number 1, the self-proclaimed leader of the group, Number 2, the mechanical genius, Number 3, basically Bubbles from the Powerpuff Girls, and Number 4, the short-tempered Scrappy-Doo wannabe. Not to mention their hamster replacements. Who else remembers the Hamster Flash game? Like the Powerpuff Girls, this show has plenty of villains too, with some of the more notable ones being the Delightful Children, the Toiletnator, Sticky Beard, and of course, Father. One thing I like about the show is how they're able to create acronyms for each operation, like that can't be easy. This is the last classic Cartoon Network series, One Recall still airing reruns in the early 2010s, outside of the Cartoon Planet block. I also remember seeing the Billy and Mandy crossover episode rerun at least once back then, and I feel like that showed more favoritism towards this series than the other one, which is why I'm mentioning it here. Much like how the Jimmy Timmy Power Hours obviously show more favoritism towards the Fairly Odd Parents. Mr. Warburton, the creator of KND, also wanted there to be a sequel series called Galactic Kids Next Door, but Cartoon Network was not interested, so they never picked it up. Though it would be odd for this series to tackle more modern topics, such as there not being a lot of safe websites for kids to visit these days, and how social media are rotting their brains. While I do think kids these days deserve better, this show's just better left in my childhood. Megas XLR. Since Cartoon Network never really premiered anything in 2003, we jump right into 2004 with another obscure series. Here we have Cartoon Network's second attempt at doing an action series, following 2 slackers and their monster truck that can transform into a giant robot. This is essentially a Western take on a mecha anime, with even the art style leaning a bit more anime-like. The most notable thing about this series is the DMV scene, where Coop uses the titular giant robot to destroy the DMV. This also marks as being the last Cartoon Network series to premiere during their Powerhouse era, which would be followed by the City era, which a lot of Cartoon Network fans collectively agree that it's the best one for the bumpers alone. One of which involves Coop interacting with Fred from Scooby-Doo for about a minute, comparing each other's vehicles and even having a race together. Hopefully Cartoon Network's next action cartoon becomes a huge success. Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. After the success of the Powerpuff Girls, Craig McCracken came up with another series, one that would become another hit for the channel, though not as successful as his first series. Like with Sheep in the Big City, this is another comedy series with episodes typically being 22 minutes long, with the occasional TV movies, and a few attempts at shorter-length stories early on before rejecting them. It's also the first Flash animated series, with it looking good here. This series opens with a TV movie too, just like Samurai Jack. It begins with Mac and his imaginary friend, Blue, being tormented by their mean older brother, Terrence. After Blue breaks a vase on him, their mother walks in and finds the mess, leading to having a talk with Mac about his imaginary friend being a bad influence. Later that night, Blue finds a commercial advertising the titular house, which they go to in the following morning. I'm not going to recap the entire thing, however. That's not what I'm here for. I'm just here to give little retrospectives on each series. The house is run by a crazy old lady by the name Madame Foster, with her granddaughter Frankie, forced to do everyone's chores since imaginary friends are known to be lazy. Mr. Harriman, Madame Foster's own imaginary friend, is a large bunny rabbit that controls the chaos going around in the house, being very strict and constantly giving Miss Frances commands. These 3 make up the entire staff of the household. The imaginary friends that Mac and Blue are most often hanging around are Wilt, Coco, and Eduardo. Wilt being incredibly friendly, as well as very apologetic, and also really good at doing basketball despite only having 1 arm and 1 working eye. Coco, who is only capable of saying her name, sometimes can be pretty chaotic at times. and has the ability to lay plastic eggs with random stuff inside. And Eduardo, the big purple Spanish-speaking monster with an even bigger heart. There's also the recurring characters Cheese and Goo, who were introduced in the second and third seasons respectively. Like with Fredburger, Cheese also became the face of Cartoon Network around the same time too for some reason. Cheese is an imaginary friend who is basically your annoying little brother or cousin. Goo, on the other hand, is a human girl who obviously has ADHD, as she talks incredibly fast and has a hyperactive imagination. While initially being praised during its run, many people's perspective on the series has changed. Despite having the word friends in the title, the series can get mean-spirited, which isn't something new, because in Craig's other series we have characters who look cute on the outside but are capable of breaking your bones. I hear complaints that Blue is too much of a jerk, being a kid-friendly Cartman from South Park, even though in many episodes he gets what he deserves. Another one I often hear is how often Frankie gets mistreated, which is a more reasonable complaint. Gloria Sato from Big City Greens is a modern-day equivalent to her, who somehow has a worse life. What doesn't help is that this series has a lot of infamous episodes. Two of the most despised ones being Everyone Knows It's Bendy and Imposter's Home for Make 'em Up Pals. The first involves an imaginary menace named Bendy, who blames the other imaginary friends for stuff he's done. The second involves a guy named Goofball McGee, who is claimed to be imaginary, despite looking human, and gets on Frankie's nerves, with a sour twist ending. There are even some people who only like the first season of the series, where the characterization isn't as bad as the later seasons, especially with Blue. I even have a headcanon that the Blue who lost in the Season 2 episode, Blues Brothers, was the real Blue, meanwhile the Blue that won is the one who appears throughout the rest of the series. Overall, the series is a bit of a mixed bag, though there are a lot of funny moments. There's even a reboot coming soon that's aimed for a preschool audience, instead of the 6 to 11 demographic this series aims for. This is around the time Cartoon Network shows started to gradually aim more towards kids, rather than all ages. As an adult, this show's just alright. It even rickrolled over thousands of people during Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade 2008. Hi Puffy Ami Yumi. I might have to take a slight detour with this series. For context as to why this series exists, we have to go back to the year 2003, where Warner Brothers Animation would premiere a DC series called Teen Titans, an action comedy series focused on the titular young crime fighters of Jump City. The intro to that series in particular was performed by a Japanese pop rock duo that went by Puffy Ami Yumi. Depending on the episode, you'd either get the normal English intro or the Japanese intro for the crazier episodes. The band would soon get their own animated series that features some live action bits involving them, though their animated counterparts use different voice actresses. In theory, this series would be a musical, but obviously that would be too expansion for Cartoon Network to pull off, and instead is a zany comedy series, which I personally don't mind at all. The series uses a UPA-inspired art style that's just aesthetically pleasing to look at, mainly due to the fact that Renegade Animation worked on the show, and the choppy animation only adds to that. This would be one of the last times a Cartoon Network show would use the 3 segments in one format that they started off with. I wouldn't say this series is really obscure, since there are plenty that still remember it fondly, though it is certainly overlooked by CN a lot, with rare occasions of them acknowledging it. There was also plenty of merch made from this show during its short run, including 2 handheld games, and it even had a Macy's float. This series has a bigger cult following compared to Robot Jones, and it's not even close. Even though it hasn't aged the best, I still enjoy it. Despite their show being off the air for decades, its spirit still lives on through Teen Titans Go, a reboot of the previously mentioned Teen Titans, with noticeably lower quality. I thought it was fine at first, but it's gotten worse the longer it's been going, and it's still currently airing new episodes to this day. The series one could compare it the most to is The Fairly Odd Parents, which features similar writing issues, same with a lot of cartoons during that show's peak. The only difference is that Teen Titans Go is a lot more self-aware in addition to its cynicalness, constantly poking fun at the haters, even if nobody even cares anymore. It really should have ended with the 2018 movie. The series has been airing for so long that the people who grew up with it are starting to form opinions, say. Anyways, this series is going around the top of the ranking. I like how the show ends with everyone fat. The life and times of Juniper Lee. One thing I picked up on in this decade of Cartoon Network, they're either releasing memorable hits or forgotten obscurities, with this being yet another obscure series. Starting from here, Cartoon Network shows would be produced in widescreen and HD, though they're not fully preserved since they aired being cropped to a 4:3 format. Most videos you can find of these older HD shows are old encodes from 20 years ago. This series follows a girl who fights monsters, and unlike the Powerpuff Girls, she's ordinary. This feels more like something that would have aired on Disney Channel at the time compared to Cartoon Network. Funnily enough, Disney XD, this sister channel of Disney Channel, has made a cartoon with a similar premise a decade later, except instead of an ordinary girl, it's an interdimensional weird princess. Not much else I could say about this series. Camp Lazlo. Despite being from the Rocco creator, this series feels more akin to SpongeBob, but just a bit campier. Basically Camp Corral before Camp Corral. The theme song doesn't explain much of what the series is about, and the lyrics are just nonsense followed by name spelling. It's fitting for a show where nonsense happens a lot. The series revolves around the spider monkey Lazlo, who has a positive outlook on life. Like I said, he's a lot similar to SpongeBob. He's often accompanied by his best pals, Raj the Indian elephant, and Clam the alligator with no personality, and most of the time is just there. Together, they make the Jelly Bean Scouts. Just their chaotic presence alone can turn Camp Kidney, upside down-o. There's also Scoutmaster Lumpus, a grouchy moose who gradually gets more insane as the series progresses, and has his own henchman, Slinkman, who's a slug. He often acts as a rival to Lazlo. both voiced by Tom Kenny, like I mentioned a while ago, voices SpongeBob, who's even more like a rival to Lazlo, is Edward, a platypus who often acts like a jerk to Lazlo, but Lazlo somehow still likes him. He is often accompanied by Chip and Skip, two identical dung beetles, who share a single brain cell together. Let them hang upside down on a tree, watch them become smart. We can't forget about Samson, the germophobic guinea pig. There's even a rival camp, Acorn Flats, which is the cleaner and more sanitary camp compared to Camp Kidney. Also, all the campers there are girls, as opposed to everyone at Kidney being boys. This can lead to very sexist situations, like having the two camps have a pinecone sitting contest, where Lazlo loses to Patsy. You can tell this is around the time Cartoon Network started leaning a bit into gross out a bit more, and while it's not done a lot here, the next series has done it a bit more. This is still a good series. My gym partner's a monkey. This is like the second Cartoon Network series in a row to have a spider monkey. Just like Camp Lazlo, this series also reuses music from SpongeBob, and even the spider monkey from this series is voiced by him. The first line of the theme song is all you need to know about the premise. The series follows an ordinary human boy who got sent to Charles Darwin Middle School, a literal school of animals, because his last name, Leon, got misspelled as lion. Now he is partnered with a troublesome spider monkey by the name of Jake, who has a creepy obsession with his own butt. Their dynamic is similar to Mac and Blue from Foster's Home. This series did very fairly well for its time, though it did used to have a bad reputation. Being used as an example of Cartoon Network shows plummeting in quality around this time. But in more recent years, this series has kind of been looked back on more fondly by some people, mainly those who grew up watching this series. Doesn't mean the hate is completely gone, however. I'd say it's definitely more entertaining than Time Squad or Robot Jones. This show's going smack dabbed in the middle. Ben 10. Just a day after Gym Partner premiered, we got one of Cartoon Network's biggest franchises ever, with 6 different series and a couple movies. Despite this, I hardly hear this series get brought up much compared to the more comedic shows of the channel, since Cartoon Network is better known for their comedies than their action shows. You kinda know what kind of show you'll be getting into when the creator's literally called Man of Action. Ben 10 follows a 10-year-old boy named Ben Tennyson, who after finding a meteor crash, gains a device on his wrist, called the Omnitrix, which allows him to turn into 10 different aliens, such as Gray Matter, Heat Blast, Cannonball, and 4 Arms. Not sure if this is just a coincidence that involves the number 10 or not. He travels in Grandpa Max's RV, the Rust Bucket, along with his cousin Gwen. The original series does a better job at doing an anime-esque art style than Megas XLR did, being slightly more expressive. And with the franchise being such a success, obviously more aliens were created for Ben to play with. Though the running gag of Ben claiming to transform into a specific alien but accidentally transforms into a different one can be found annoying, which happens pretty frequently in each installment. The following series is Alien Force, a time skip where the characters are older, with Ben being a teenager, and it's darker and serious compared to the original. Even the art style is a bit more restrained. It even includes new aliens. Ultimate Alien is basically a continuation of this, where Ben gets the Ultimatrix, which has the ultimate forms of aliens he had in the previous installment. Omniverse is quite possibly my favorite of the franchise. It uses a more simplistic but really angular art style, making it the most visually appealing installment. Derek J. Wyatt, rest in peace, who previously designed the characters in Teen Titans, Transformers Animated, and Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, had this distinct art style that really shines through these more actiony shows that are quite comedic too. This fits with the slightly sillier vibe this has, while still having its serious moments. Somehow taking place after the events after Ultimate Alien, yet there are flashback episodes involving younger Ben too. With Gwen and Kevin away, Ben finds a guy named Rook at a grocery store, which heavily gets destroyed by the fighting going on inside, as well as Ben's incompetence. This would be Cartoon Network's last original series to have episodes in a full-length 22-minute format. In 2016, we'd get the 6th and final installment of the franchise that takes place in a different continuity compared to the previous series. It didn't premiere until April 2017 in my area, which is coincidentally the same month 2 other infamous Cartoon Network reboots premiered. Like Omniverse, there's a drastic art style change, except this one's way worse. The art style is a lot softer, with more rounded edges, with it looking nothing like anime at all. It looks decent on characters like Ben or Gwen, though other characters like Grandpa Max, not so much. You can tell that this series has been heavily held back by Cartoon Network's business practices and executive meddling, much like the Powerpuff Girls reboot, except not as awful. It's been leaning a bit towards this with Omniverse, but it's especially prominent here. For some reason, the crew members' artwork looks a lot more appealing than the actual series. Unlike the Powerpuff Girls reboot, which was abysmal, this series is just boring, as there's nothing really going for it that makes it stand out compared to the original series. Almost forgot to mention that the episodes are shortened to 11 minutes to fit with the format that a lot of their shows had during that decade. Compared to the Powerpuff Girls, this franchise is a bit more consistent in quality, with its highs not being as high and its lows not being as low, despite the last series kind of dwindling the quality a bit. It's also going somewhere around the middle of the ranking. Squirrel Boy. We've finally reached a series that's worse than Mike, Lou, and Og. That show was just boring, meanwhile this show's pretty mediocre. Nowhere near as bad as the 2016 Powerpuff Girls, however. It even uses the same dynamic of a normal kid, paired with a wacky troublemaking creature that were previously used in Foster's Home and Gym Partner. I could not for the life of me hear Rodney's voice without thinking of Zim, since they're both voiced by Richard Horvitz, who also voices Billy from Billy and Mandy. The only other thing I could mention here is that it's by the creator of the Class Geek Supo show, Duckman, Everett Peck, which explains the similar designs. I can see why this series is obscure. Bottom of the list. Class of 3000. Let's follow an obscure show with another obscure show. Here's the first and possibly only Cartoon Network series that is primarily focused on music, specifically jazz. While their shows had songs before, none of them are really as dedicated to music as this one. It focuses on the lives of the musical teacher, Sonny Bridges, voiced by Andre 3000, who is also the creator of the series, and his students. Similarly, just like Hi Puffy Ami Yumi, the characters also go on pretty wacky adventures. It also uses a looser and wavier art style, compared to the more sharper art styles of the shows that surrounded it. I'm putting this series in a random sweet spot, in the ranking. It's my ranking, I can do whatever I want. Chowder. We're slowly approaching the era where I personally kept up with the network. Here we have what might be Cartoon Network's funniest series. It follows a young cat-bear-rabbit creature by the name of Chowder, who is the apprentice of Mung Dal, an experienced chef who runs his own catering company. In almost each episode, there's a new recipe for them to cook up, but the only problem is that Chowder's a scatterbrain, so he cooks up trouble instead. Mung Dal has the funniest backstory in any cartoon. Funnier than any of Doofenshmirtz's backstories. Another character who works at the catering company is Schnitzel, who is a rock monster that usually only says the word rata, and often does Mung's dirty work, like cleaning up messes, lifting heavy objects, and even scratching Mung's back. There's also Truffles, Mung Dal's wife, who is a short-tempered mushroom pixie. Other notable characters are Gazpacho, the brown mammoth that has mother issues, Gorgonzola, a candle rat creature who has a disdain for chowder, Miss Endive, Mung Dal's rival with a long nose and an even bigger butt, and Panini, who has a creepy obsession with chowder. She's nowhere near as threatening as the Cankers from Ed and Eddy, despite her having a similar purpose. I think moments where she acts as a friend to Chowder, despite being rare, kind of makes up for it, though that still doesn't save her character. Chowder also screams, "I'm not your boyfriend," whenever they encounter each other. The series also has a really fun art style, with one key feature that makes it stand out from other shows being the textures on the characters staying in place while they move. The series begins with a slightly messy art style, but halfway into season 1, the art style got cleaned up a bit, with it gradually becoming cleaner and more expressive over time. The series also uses stop-motion bits, and even puppetry in the credits. That's not to mention the writing of this series, which is pure comedy gold, especially when the characters are either doing meta jokes or breaking the fourth wall, which works for this show surprisingly well. I used to watch this a bunch when it was on Netflix, though it never really aired reruns often after its conclusion, except for when it was included as a part of the Cartoon Planet block, and would eventually move its reruns to Boomerang. For now, it's going on top of the list, but I believe there'll be another show that'll top it, which will happen when we reach the next decade. The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack. Like with Gym Partners, this series became well more liked over the years, mainly because it would influence cartoons that would premiere in the following decade. It follows the titular character, and his drunken pirate father figure, Captain Knuckles, who both live inside a whale named Bubby, his adoptive mother, whose goal is to escape Stormalong Harbor, a dock area in the middle of the ocean, to get to Candy Island, but often find themselves in crazy predicaments along the way, causing them to never go to that island. The series goes for an uglier art style compared to most other CN shows on purpose, which adds to the appeal of the series, as it pretty much rivals Courage the Cowardly Dog in the creepiness factor. Like with Chowder or The Eds Show, this series' art style also gets more expressive as it goes on. It also uses stop motion as well, like the intro or whenever Candy Wife appears. Overall, this is a pretty solid series if you're into that kind of stuff. Just like its granddaughter series, The Owl House over on Disney Channel, this series had a shortened third season. Funnily enough, that series even had a character named Flapjack too, but they became deceased. The reason its third season was so short, because the series aired at a time where Cartoon Network started to shift towards an older audience with shows like Total Drama Island and Star Wars The Clone Wars. What also didn't help is that they also started making live-action shows around this time, which ultimately led to shows like this one and Chowder getting cancelled. We only have one more classic CN series left before we get to the big renaissance, The Secret Saturdays. This is like Cartoon Network's fifth action series, and it's somewhat obscure. Right after it ended, it moved to Boomerang for reruns on its Boomeraction block that used to be on that channel, usually after an episode of Teen Titans. This series is heavily influenced by shows like Johnny Quest, not to be confused with Johnny Test, which used to air a lot around this time. This would later have a crossover with Ben 10 Omniverse years later. This show's just alright. Adventure Time Cartoon Network never really premiered any new original cartoons in 2009, partially due to the writer strike as well as the Aqua Teen movie controversy, leading them to rely on Canadian import shows for a short while. In the spring of 2010, they would premiere one of their biggest shows in the history of the network ever. It's the series that would end the classic era of Cartoon Network shows and begin the modern era of Cartoon Network shows. Is it really modern anymore if the series premiered 15 years ago? Don't get me wrong, but this premiered the same year that Kick Buttowski, Fishhooks, and Tough Puppy all premiered, and those all look visually dated compared to Adventure Time, which still kinda holds up in 2025. Though the first two seasons can look a bit rough at times, and they even had weird quirks like Finn's eyes bulging out, which would disappear around season 2. What I also don't get is how the series' sneak peeks during March 2010 don't count as its premiere, while other shows like Gym Partners and Ben 10's sneak peeks in December 2005 count as their premieres. Most sources say that it premiered in April 2010, on the same day we got a sneak peek to Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, which is just Peak Scooby. Just a month before that, the two episodes Business Time and Evicted premiered. They should at least count as something. This series is responsible for leading into an era of cartoons where the characters' faces are shaped like beans, which was pretty common in the 2010s, and hasn't really gone away. If you look at something more recent like Primos, Stewie, or even the upcoming Wowdy Pack series, they're designed very similarly to what cartoons looked like just a decade ago. In retrospect, this series shares a bit of similarities with Fanboy and Chum Chum, another Frederator series. Both main characters' names start with the letter F, who are accompanied by their orange friends. Both series even have an ice character and a gum character. And that's not even mentioning both series using fart jokes at times. Speaking of which, both series started off as a part of the Nickelodeon pilot showcase series, Random Cartoons, which is the successor to Oh Yeah Cartoons, which is Nick's take on the What a Cartoon Show. You'd probably heard the story before. LS Mark even makes a good point about it in his Fanboy and Chum Chum video, so go check it out. This is the earliest Series 1 vividly remember catching new episodes airing on TV back then. During this show's peak, which is the first 4 seasons and maybe a bit of 5, this series had a lot of memorable bits, whether it be the little jingles they'd sing such as Bacon Pancakes, or really funny moments like the Boing Gallowings line. Somewhere along the way, the series sort of lost that in favor for more lore-driven stories. They'd even do little mini-series near the end of its run, such as the Stakes one. A lot of the songs written during the show's peak are really memorable and unironically good too. A lot of this series' most iconic songs were written by the storyboard artist Rebecca Sugar, who'd later create her own series for the network just a couple years later. I remember having a bunch of merch for it when I was younger, such as toys, shirts, books, and DVDs. I remember wearing a green t-shirt with Finn and Jake dancing, and reading the cool official encyclopedia book they made. I also remember getting the DVDs that came with cool hats based on both Finn and Jake. The first 3DS game I've ever played was an Adventure Time one, and I remember playing a bunch of old Flash games based on the series on the now-defunct Cartoon Network website. Since the series concluded in 2018, it has gotten both the Distant Land specials, as well as the Fiona and Cake spin-off, which is more mature than the original series, which was already more mature compared to anything that had premiered before. This being the first Cartoon Network original series being rated TV-PG, with the new spin-off being TV-14. The original Fiona and Cake episode in 2011 was just a story told by Ice King about him pro-shipping himself with a female version of the kid who beats him up fairly often, which definitely hasn't aged well. This is also the Cartoon Network series with the most seasons, which is 10. Just like Frederator's other popular series, The Fairly Odd Parents, which you could tell it definitely overstayed its welcome. While the Eds had been on the air for much longer, Adventure Time has the most episodes of any Cartoon Network series period. While Flapjack was pretty influential, Adventure Time, being the popular phenomena that it is even more influential in comparison. This series not only was an inspiration to other cartoons, but it also helped shape me into the person I am today. I don't know where I would be today without this series. Generator Rex. Because Ben 10 was a massive hit for Cartoon Network, they let Man of Action create another series for the network. Was it just as successful as Ben 10? No. Was it just as good as Ben 10? That's up for debate. This series even had a crossover with Ben 10 Ultimate Alien, and would be acknowledged again in the 2016 series in its crossover episode. Dunno what's the purpose of including it there, because it's not going to spark the interests of kids to make them watch a show from over a decade ago that's not even on a streaming service. And fans of this series, if there are still any 15 years later, aren't going to be happy about it. This is even the second series in a row to have the animal sidekick character be voiced by John DiMaggio, who is best known for voicing Bender, as well as the previous series Jake the Dog. Here he voices the monkey, Bobo, who's similar to Rocket from the Guardians of the Galaxy. Personally, I'm more into the more comedic shows Cartoon Network is more known for, which is why whenever I get to the action shows, I usually give them shorter reviews compared to most other series aside from the more obscure ones. Not to mention that the majority of the action series are obscure, with the exception being Ben 10, which I tried not to spend too much time talking about. Like, I get why Cartoon Network stopped doing these after a while, but this won't be the last one I get to talk about. Regular show. Just 1 week after Flapjack ended, came the premiere of this show, with the premiere of Mad, just right after. Not a lot of people mention this, but Warner Brothers used to premiere some of their shows on the same day that the channel's big 3, with the last one not even being mentioned yet. While not as massive as Adventure Time was, Regular Show is still a pretty popular series for the network. Just like that series, it has a TV-PG rating, TV-PGV, if you will. This show is possibly Cartoon Network's most adult series ever, feeling like an Adult Swim series that found itself on Cartoon Network. The characters even swear at times. The series follows the two 23-year-old slackers, Mordecai, the Blue Jay, and Rigby, the raccoon, as their laziness often escalates into world-ending scenarios that are usually resolved by the end, followed by their boss, Benson, the sentient gumball machine, threatening to fire them. Sometimes the problems come from Mordecai's love interest, Margaret. You'd think a plot like this would get real old very quickly, but it works really well in Regular Show favor, mainly due to the witty writing and dialogue, which are really funny. Amphibia, a Disney Channel series that premiered almost a decade after, also follows this formula early on, but it doesn't really work there as much, as it feels a lot more predictable. The episodes of that show would usually end with a character, usually Anne, apologizing and quickly being forgiven by the Plantars, yet the town treats her like a monster. In Regular Show, the episodes usually end with Benson yelling at the two, with them not even learning their lesson. Speaking of episodes, the format for most Cartoon Network shows starting around this era and going forward would change from a 22-minute episode containing 2 segments to 11-minute episodes counting as the whole episode, with the occasional double-length half-hour specials. I also used to have some merch from this show when I was younger too, though not as much as Adventure Time's merch, even though I liked this show better. I also played the heck out of its Flash games too, like Ride 'em Rigby, Night Marathon, and Fist Punch. I even had the 3DS game too, that's lacking in fan service, and has an insanely drawn-out final boss. They even made a half-hour special, poking fun at the quality of some of its merchandise, most notably the toys that I never got the chance of getting. One aspect I dislike from the series, however, are the episodes revolving around Mordecai's love life, which is fine at first, but rears its ugly head when we get to the infamous love triangle between him, Margaret, and CJ, that takes up majority of Season 6. CJ being this cloud girl who was initially a one-time character back in Season 3, who Mordecai started dating because he saw Margaret with someone else, not knowing they're related. This comes back to bite him in the New Year's Party episode of Season 5, where she returns while Margaret's in college, becoming a recurring character in the process. When Margaret returns, that's where things go downhill for Mordecai. Whenever he gets close to Margaret for even 1 second, CJ gets upset. You could say that CJ's too clingy towards him, but Margaret isn't even better. She's often oblivious to Mordecai's crush on her, and she even made Mordecai lose a bet towards Muscleman because she didn't want to kiss his chilly dog breath. Also, most secondary characters are voiced by Sonic. The turning point of the series would have to be the train crash that is dumped at the altar, the episode to finally end the love triangle arc of Mordecai's life, where he interrupts Muscleman and Starla's wedding. These are usually the points in some shows where most people would stop watching. Adventure Time has experienced a similar fate with the episode Frost and Fire, which was infamous enough to have its own DVD release, where Finn gets a wet dream after seeing Flame Princess and Ice King fight, forcing them to do it again. I guess he learned nothing from playing God previously that season. I'd personally say the cutoff point for most Adventure Time fans would have to be the Time Sandwich episode, with one scene getting millions of views on YouTube, making it the most watched clip of the series. This would be followed by the TV movie focusing on Mordecai and Rigby's relationship and time traveling. The 7th season would involve the park being trapped in a dome, as well as an arc where Rigby goes back to high school, where he actually graduates. This would then be followed by the 8th and final season where the park goes to space, with the first half dedicated to wacky space antics, with the other half involving one of the main characters gaining more lore to them. But I'm not going to spoil it for those who haven't seen the series. Not to mention how this series spawned a lot of dude bro cartoons like Sanjay and Craig, or Pickle and Peanut later in the decade. I think this is Cartoon Network's best series ever, in my opinion, because I don't think any show, in the foreseeable future, that'll be able to top it. Sym-Bionic Titan. Here's Genndy Tartakovsky's 3rd and final Cartoon Network series, which, like Samurai Jack, is an action series. Since this series takes itself more seriously compared to the Man of Action shows airing around the same time, and wasn't as marketable compared to them, it was cancelled only after 1 season, with it being the shortest Cartoon Network series so far. Since then, the series also gathered a cult following, begging for the series to be brought back. After its cancellation, it would air reruns on Adult Swim's Toonami block for a bit. When your show's most memorable moment is the scene involving twerking, that's definitely not a good sign. Like I said before, I like my plots extra thick. Robotomy. This beats Sym-Bionic Titan as the shortest Cartoon Network series ever. Rather than 22-minute episodes, here we have 10-11-minute episodes. Always thought this series gave me Adult Swim vibes from the visuals alone. I remember catching one random episode during the Cartoon Planet block, which was meant to air CN's older shows, and seeing the main characters, Thrasher and Blastus, getting run over by a bunch of cars in the background. That sentence alone lets you know how chaotic this series is. The Problem Solverz. Here is Cartoon Network's most infamous series, and its biggest punching bag. Mainly for its seizure-inducing visuals, but if you look past that, you'd find a very boring series. While I do agree that it's one of their worst shows, I wouldn't say it's the worst show. Squirrel Boy and especially the 2016 Powerpuff Girls reboot surpasses it in that. It's going low in this ranking. Go watch LS Marks about this series video instead, and then come back to finish this one. The Amazing World of Gumball. Here's our first hit in quite a bit. Unlike most of the previous shows, this one was worked on by Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, who have renamed themselves Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe since. I don't think this series really needs an introduction, because it never stopped airing since it premiered, despite not making any new episodes in years. Many of the episodes revolve around the financial troubles of the Watterson family, much like the really early Simpsons. In one episode, they tried turning their house into a bed and breakfast, after Richard spends all their money on a pony named Thunderclop. Or even the first episode, where Gumball and Darwin try to get money in order to pay for a DVD fine without getting in trouble from their mother. The best example comes from the episode, The Money, where the Wattersons became broke to the point of destroying reality. The show relies heavily on meta-humor in its later years, such as the one where they poke fun at its Chinese ripoff, or the one where they poke fun at fans' OCs. I think the show back in its first season had the most charming art style, and the series felt very different compared to what it would later become. As the humor got smarter, Gumball became less naive, and the charm of that first season seems to fade away quickly. Compared to Adventure Time and regular show, which both peaked early on, during the early 2010s, Gumball, on the other hand, despite premiering around that time, I'd say peaked during the mid-2010s, because of it finding its footing. The series also has a few hints of continuity too, like Penny being outside her shell for more than half of the series, and Rob going from a reject to the main antagonist. The series ends on a cliffhanger. One key factor to why the show took longer to find its footing is because it's a lot more complex to produce compared to everything else I had talked about. I mean, just look at it. It uses a bunch of different mediums on its characters, like 2D, CGI, and even live action. The citizens of Elmore are almost as ruthless as the Springfieldians or Bikini Bottomites, especially that orange Karen lady. There's also the occasional bits where the art style would just change, similar to certain Adventure Time episodes. Overall, this show's pretty amazing. This is possibly the earliest instance of the infamous bean-mouth face that would appear in a lot of 2010 shows, even outside of Cartoon Network's control. Secret Mountain Fort Awesome / Uncle Grandpa. Here's another infamous show that was essentially the partner in crime to the Problem Solverz. The heavily obnoxious marketing for this show didn't help either, nor does the title make any sense. But that's where the main characters, who are grotesque party monsters called the Disgustoids, live, I guess. That run-on sentence was crazy, but not any crazier than what the show had to offer. The Disgustoids first appeared in the Uncle Grandpa pilot, as the antagonists. This is the series where Uncle Grandpa properly first appears in, before getting his own series, where he is portrayed as the Disgustoids' equivalent to Santa Claus. I'd rather talk about his own series than this series, which I'm just gonna do. Uncle Grandpa is this mythical humanoid being who helps children with their problems in the most ridiculous ways imaginable. But this is often pushed aside, as he more often than not bums around with his pals like Giant Realistic Flying Tiger, and even two characters introduced in this series, Mr. Gus and Pizza Steve, who'd get their own Friday night block very early into the series run. Even the sign on and off were changed to be Uncle Grandpa peeking over a mountaintop with classical music, saying his iconic catchphrase, "Good morning." Obviously, this series is a lot better than Pete Browngart's previous series, Secret Mountain Fort Awesome. Pizza Steve is just as iconic, if not more iconic, than Uncle Grandpa himself. In the earlier episodes, you can tell there's a bit of crudeness from Secret Mountain left over, but this quickly goes away as the series gets a lot more refined in its art style. In the series' later years, the backgrounds got a lot more detailed, and Uncle Grandpa is more consistently off-model, to where his eyes are smaller and his mustache looks like a noodle. Never understood the hate for the series, as it's just a wacky comedy series where anything goes, much like Nickelodeon's Fanboy and Chum Chum, which also tries to be a wacky comedy series rather than a gross-out one. Sanjay and Craig are more in line with gross-out humor. What also doesn't help is that this aired at a time where a lot of cartoons were focusing more on serialization, something I'd go more in-depth about with the next series. This series is also presented in a format as weird as the titular character himself, where usually the first 7 minutes is like the primary episode, followed by 10 seconds of the characters being in a white void, which is then followed by a short either relating to the main cast, or other characters like Evil Wizard or Berry Nice and Hot Dog Person. I'd say this series is pretty good, going near the top. Can't say the same about Secret Mountain, however. Steven Universe. Now here's a show with a colorful history. If you're expecting an education show about gemstones, then you've come to the wrong place. The series follows the titular character, a young boy that just so happens to also be a gem, as you can see from his belly. He's one of the members of a group of gems called the Crystal Gems. The intro even explains who they are and what their purpose is, a bit, but never really goes in depth with their personalities. Steven's your typical shonen protagonist, who looks up to the other Crystal Gems and wants to learn more about himself and his deceased mother. Spoiler alert, he is his own mother. I should probably avoid spoilers when talking about this series. Unlike other gems, he's a human hybrid. Other members of the Crystal Gems include Garnet, the quiet leader who hardly ever emotes, Amethyst, a lazy slob that often goofs around, and Pearl, the mature and naggy one. They all act like motherly figures to Steven in some way, often trying to protect him early on, despite him wanting to be in the action too. Together, they all try to protect Beach City from all kinds of dangers, though we learn more about it later in the series. As you can probably tell by now, this is a very story-heavy show, even more than Adventure Time, as it leans more towards drama than comedy, despite the cutesy art style. Speaking of the art style, this is where we officially reached the infamous bean mouth fad that a lot of 2010s and a few 2020 shows had, although early traces of it were previously seen in both Adventure Time and Gumball. I honestly don't think this show's art direction's that bad. In fact, it's quite beautiful, with its mostly pastel color palette. The only thing you could compare it to at the time was the new Bee and Puppycat pilot that you could watch on your Nintendo 3DS. What's even more fantastic is the soundtrack. Even though this series isn't really a musical, it still has a lot of good songs that rival some of the best Adventure Time songs. This is mostly because the creator, Rebecca Sugar, worked on both series and wrote songs for each of them. Back when this show was new, I wasn't all that into it. The first episode had him puking, he was naked in another episode, he almost died of old age, and even turned into a cat monster. When I was younger, this all felt pretty awkward, and it made me want to turn away from the show. Which I did at first, but one day in 2015, I went on Reddit, and it seemed like everyone on there was praising the show all of a sudden, pairing it up with the popular Disney Channel series Gravity Falls, and for some reason the Adult Swim series Rick and Morty. At first, I thought people were liking it for ironic reasons, even though I actually like Gravity Falls for being about as snappy as regular show. One day in 2016, I randomly caught an episode airing on TV, and I thought it was quite decent. Then came 2017, where I tried to catch reruns of it whenever it would play. This show really peaked in those middle seasons, where it wasn't as uncomfortable as the first season but wasn't as focused as its last season, but I think the cozier slice-of-life episodes are the best ones in my opinion. Nothing will ever top the episode where Pearl and Peridot fight in giant robots. If Adventure Time and My Little Pony Friendship is Magic were the embodiment of the early 2010s, then Steven Universe and Starverses, the forces of evil, would be the embodiment of the mid-2010s. Granted, I stopped being a fan of My Little Pony by the time when the Discovery Family era of the show began, which was around the same time Steven Universe boosted into popularity with the episode Jailbreak. I didn't keep up with every episode, even though I should've. Season 5 was notoriously slow when it came to episode releases, so I didn't follow along with it, but I did see the finale to the original series in 2019. Later in that same year, Cartoon Network celebrated Labor Day by airing nothing but Steven Universe for the entire weekend, leading up to Steven Universe the movie, which I caught live on TV. After listening to Drift Away a bunch of times on YouTube, I decided to stop watching Steven Universe ever since, which made me miss out on the epilogue series, Steven Universe Future. I forgot to mention it, but both the movie and Future have a 2-year time skip from the end of the original series. Luckily, I didn't check it out, because that's when the series started to get seen in a negative light, with its bad fanbase, rushed ending, and its epilogue series being Toy Story 4 level mid. Same with the Disney XD series, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, where it started to fall off around the last 2 seasons, where Starco is focused more primarily, as well as it taking place on Muni rather than Earth, leading to one of the worst finales in television. That's how it ends? The show that had it the worst was Adult Swim's Rick and Morty, with its creator being a horrible person. I'm glad people still like Gravity Falls though. Overall, the series is quite decent, just like my initial opinions on it when it first came out. Looking back on this show, it's safe to say that it's very similar to Friendship is Magic. I stopped watching around that show's 5th season. It's going underneath the top 10 so far. The Uncle Grandpa crossover is still pretty peak in my opinion. Clarence. We're hit with another bean-mouth cartoon, Clarence. If you're a boomer, you might confuse him for Steven Universe from the previous series of the same name. It doesn't help that they premiered around the same time. Unlike Steven Universe, this show is primarily focused on slice of life, just without Pizza Steve. It follows the titular character, who's a young boy that is optimistic and very friendly, in a more realistic kind of way. He's the embodiment of childlike wonder, and let's be honest, we were all like Clarence as kids. He's friends with Jeff, who's a neat freak kid with a square head, and Sumo, a chaotic bald kid often getting Clarence into shenanigans. There's also Belson, the rich kid, who is kind of a bully to Clarence, but is too lazy to be one, and often plays video games instead. Deep down he kinda appreciates him, but he just doesn't want to admit it. He's got that regular show minor character voice. Clarence might be Cartoon Network's most realistic series ever, as there's not really anything outlandish about it, unless it's a part of Clarence's imagination. Like one episode was drawn in a rubber hose style up until the end, where it's all just in Clarence's mind. I find this series pretty funny, especially the earlier episodes, because of how unhinged Clarence can be. Even though this is one of the last primarily TVPG-rated shows, here you could start to notice how Cartoon Network's slowly trying to aim towards kids. This would get progressively worse once Cartoon Network started to fully embrace Teen Titans Go as its primary series in terms of marketing. Still, this series is going really high in my list. Underneath the top 5. The We Bare Bears franchise. This series started off as Tumblr comics, before getting picked up for a series. This marks the first Cartoon Network show in a long while to have a TVY7 rating. It follows the 3 bear bros, Grizz, Panda, and Ice Bear, as they try to fit in with society, despite being bears. This might be one of Cartoon Network's more cozier shows, as it has a more chill vibe to it compared to anything that came before in the decade. It's also the first show I can recall that actually felt like it took place in the 2010s, with it acknowledging smartphones and memes without being too in your face about it like the 2016 Powerpuff Girls reboot. Most episodes depict the bears as adults, though there are the occasional ones focusing on them as babies, which are a lot more formulaic compared to the ordinary stuff. The baby bears often find themselves wanting to find a home, which leads to them being in trouble, and after the problem is solved, the cycle repeats itself. I'm not too much of a fan of these episodes compared to the normal bear stuff. Like with Steven Universe, the show would have its own Labor Day weekend marathon leading up to its respective movie, focusing on the bears going on a road trip adventure since they're on the run after somehow hacking everybody's phones. It's basically Sponge on the Run done right. After a year of no content, the franchise came back in the form of We Baby Bears, a spin-off series focusing on the bears as babies. But this time it's a lot more surreal. The original series felt almost as grounded as Clarence, despite the main characters being literally talking bears who are friends with Bigfoot, with more surreal stuff happening every so often. In this series, the baby bears have a magical box that can take them anywhere in the universe. Again, the baby bear plots here are just as formulaic as the original series, where each episode has them exploring a new place, only for them to leave and find a new one by the next episode. Despite the more anime-like art style, it feels too cutesy for me. Not saying that it's bad, but I don't see myself really watching this often. They also got Toby Fox, the creator of Undertale, which came out the same year as the original series, to voice a skeleton pirate in an episode. It's a very solid franchise overall. Does a better job at being consistent compared to the Powerpuff Girls, Ben 10, and might I say Steven Universe too? Going underneath the top 10 of the overall ranking so far. Long live the Royals. Ironically, this is now the shortest series on the list, beating both Robotomy and Over the Garden Wall. This is Cartoon Network's second attempt at a miniseries, and it failed, since nobody seems to remember this ever existing, airing very late into 2015, after Adventure Time aired their Stakes episodes. It's going very low in the ranking, since I'm not a fan of the art style here. Mighty Magiswords. I remember this starting off as shorts that you could watch on Cartoon Network's defunct website and its official YouTube channel, as well as being included in Cartoon Network Anything. Though what most people will remember about this show now is how it has a bad creator. The series follows the siblings, Prohias and Vambre, as they go on quests and collect swords with special abilities, and even use the swords to solve or cause problems. Those two are essentially human versions of Dudley and Kitty from Tough Puppy, created by Butch Hartman. Vambre even shares the same voice actress, but with a British accent. I think the series worked a lot better as shorts rather than a full TV series. The fast pacing is better suited for short-form content rather than a whole 11 minutes. I remember when this came out and Cartoon Network tried promoting it a bunch. Yours Day got rebranded to Swords Day, and they even created an app where you could scan the TV to collect Magiswords. Though shortly after, they almost pretend that it never existed, until it officially ended, where they completely forgot about it. Going forward, this would be how Cartoon Network would treat most of their shows, which was already something Nickelodeon was doing for over a decade. This show's going near the bottom of the list, though we get to see a character from the next series appear in the last episode. OKKO, Let's Be Heroes. Here's a show with the most troubled production behind it. Around the same time the Steven Universe and Clarence pilots released, came the Lakewood Plaza Turbo pilot, which features early versions of the OKKO characters, where they all look very different, especially Enid, who almost looks like an entirely different character and even has Clarence's mother's voice. This would later be poked fun of in the actual series. Afterwards, we heard nothing from this pilot for years until 2016, when it suddenly gets a mobile app, where the characters are slightly evolving from their pilot incarnations. It's a fun side-scrolling beat-em-up game, with fun story progression. Alongside it, came a bunch of series of shorts, where the characters are closer to how they appear in the TV series, that would premiere in the summer of 2017, right after the Teen Titans Go's Night Begin to Shine episodes. The series follows a young boy, named Kaio, who works at a bodega that sells supplies for heroes. His co-workers are radicals, an alien with levitation powers, and Enid, who's a ninja. His boss is Mr. Gar, and his mother works at a fitness dojo in the same plaza. There's also an evil factory across the street, run by Lord Boxman, who produces robots that attack the plaza, which the employees have to fight. In Season 1, KO often finds himself wanting to level up and become a hero, because in this universe, your level determines how strong and heroic you are. Like a video game, these are recorded onto POW cards, which are collectible cards that stores information and allows people to know their progress. The higher your level is, the stronger you are, though there are negative levels that determine how evil a character is, and you're both neutral and weak if it's just at 0. KO is a pretty huge fan of them, as well as his smart friend, Dendy, who appears sometimes. On paper, that might sound repetitive, but in execution, this series never takes itself too seriously, and has fun doing whatever. Some episodes they don't even fight robots at all. This series has a sort of nostalgic charm that's closer to a lot of pre-Adventure Time Cartoon Network shows, while still having traits of a post-Adventure Time Cartoon Network show. This series is not at all formulaic like, let's say, Phineas and Ferb, though despite that series having a lot of the same plot beats in most episodes, it can still get really creative. This series also got continuity, though it doesn't feel forced at all, so a lot of episodes could be watched in any order. Like, you don't need to watch a previous episode to know how Radicals turned into a burger or something, which is something that actually happens in the series due to its silly nature. One thing I like about the series is the world building, because I find the universe the characters live in quite interesting. I enjoy a lot of the designs of the background characters in the series, because their designs are really appealing and are just as, if not more interesting to explore than the main characters, who are all really good characters themselves. Also wished we explore locations like the Danger Zone or Neo Riot City some more, rather than just the plaza and Boxmoor. I'm not complaining about the final product, though I do wish it explored a bit more. Not to mention this series would occasionally have crossover episodes, such as the Captain Planet and Ghoul School ones. The most notable crossovers to ever come from the series are Crossover Nexus and Let's Meet Sonic, which I believe are some people's only exposure to the series. Which is a shame since the series is more than that, but at the same time, they put a lot of passion into their work. Crossover Nexus takes place in the old CN City from the 2000s decade, where a foe summons KO and turn him into stone. But with the help of Garnet, 2016 Ben Tennyson, and Lady Legasis, they all team up to beat him. We even get a cool sequence of Ben transforming into multiple Cartoon Network characters from over the years, and tons of fun Easter eggs throughout. The Sonic crossover is kinda the same, though KO doesn't go to the Sonic universe, but it's the other way around, with Sonic and Tails visiting the bodega which promises free chili dogs, which is actually a trick from Lord Boxman, as Darrell kidnaps Rad and Enid while they're napping, and it's up to KO and his Mobian friends to stop him. We even get to see Robot KO again from the alternate universe episode. Like the previous crossover, there's a bunch of references here too, with it even ending with a PSA, akin to the old 90s Sonic cartoon. It's almost like the writers are equally as much a fan of Sonic as KO is, and he's a huge fan of him. As the first season progresses, we get to see the main conflict of the series to arise, which involves KO's relationship with his edgy evil alter ego, TKO, as well as the series' most important antagonist, Shadowy Figure, who plans on hoarding glowing orbs called Glorbs from a glorb tree planted underneath the plaza. Who might this Shadowy Figure be? I'm not going to spoil important details. A more minor one that becomes more relevant as the series progresses is the relationship between Professor Venomous and Lord Boxman. This conflict doesn't affect every episode, though it does get brought up from time to time, like Mr. Gar and KO going on a stakeout to prevent Shadowy Figure from getting Glorbs, and Dendy trying to push KO's limits before transforming into TKO and destroying her lab in Dexter's laboratory fashion. The following season also involves plot points revolving around Point, an old superhero team that Carol and Mr. Gar used to be in when they were younger, and how they're not what they seem. Though this mainly began around the middle of the season, where Enid applies for Point Prep and reunites with Elliot for a couple of episodes before dropping out. Even changing the credits briefly, though for about a year this arc got interrupted by a hiatus that lasted about a year before getting resolved. Now's a good time to talk about how horrid Cartoon Network's schedule was during this era. Back in July 2017, episodes were dumped onto the CN app to be viewed before they aired on TV. However, they weren't unlocked, meaning that you must have a cable provider to view them, which is a strategy Cartoon Network had been doing for a while, especially around this time. The series didn't officially premiere on the network until August, where the first couple episodes made their debut, after Teen Titans Go. This show also got a decent amount of advertising around this time too. Throughout the rest of the year from August to November, the series would premiere at least one episode per week. By the end of 2017, over 40 episodes of the series had premiered. Not sure if this was a sign that Cartoon Network wanted to get rid of the series, or it was just that cheap to make. I mean, I've seen anime premiere episodes frequently but never Western cartoons, because those take a bit more time. While it might seem like this series would become the next big hit for Cartoon Network, unfortunately, episodes would premiere less frequently going into 2018, as the series took a backseat for newer shows that would be premiering. That doesn't mean that the series completely stopped airing, because it did get to air the rest of Season 1 and even some earlier Season 2 episodes, but reruns were almost non-existent, meaning you could only catch these episodes air only once. Then we get to summer 2018, where as a part of Cartoon Network's best summer ever branding, though I personally wouldn't really consider that because this was late 2010s Cartoon Network after all, ironically enough, the series abruptly gets put to a hiatus during a school arc. Any summer spent with Teen Titans Go, Ben 1010, and the putrid Puff Girls reboot is nowhere near the best, and the fact that the best series currently airing never got to conclude its arc really hurts it. What hurts even more is that the hiatus lasted a year long, where only 3 episodes premiered in between. Episodes didn't start regularly airing again until 2019, with the rest of Season 2 and all of Season 3, though without any announcement from the network itself, cause they just wanted it to be done with it. Shortly after the premiere of Steven Universe the movie, this series ended with 3 back-to-back episodes, with the middle being a half-hour special. This also marked the last time the series would ever air on the network, though it did become available to watch on both Hulu and HBO Max before getting purged off both platforms, with no signs of it returning, since it's barely acknowledged by the network itself anymore. Because it's a real shame, because this was a highlight during the era where the network began going downhill to the state where it's at today. Though I'm almost kind of glad that it didn't last into pandemic times. Not to say the series didn't get any merchandise at all, but there was very little of it. The series only got 1 DVD release and a singular video game titled Let's Play Heroes that had been delisted from all digital stores, though there is a physical copy of it that's paired up with Steven Universe's Save the Light, but good luck trying to find it out in the wild. I actually remember playing the PS4 version of it when it came out in 2018, and it was a very fun experience. Despite the different art style done by the people who'd later work on #Blood, the writing is very much on par with the series itself, much like how Hit and Run or Battle for Bikini Bottom feel just like their source material. Did you know in certain scenes, symbols appear on screen for a bit, which you could enter in the game's POW card machine? This series also had a couple of mobile games too, like the previously mentioned Precursor game from 2016 that includes earlier versions of the characters, which plays out like a side-scrolling beat-em-up. Another app this series had was the Action News app, which stars Dynamite Watkins, who is the series' own news anchor woman that first appears when KO's POW card glitched to level 100. This game is essentially a rhythm game that involves swiping your phone to the corresponding arrows to form an attack move. Lastly, this series had an Endless Runner game that was included in the now-defunct Cartoon Network arcade app, which is basically a revamped version of the Magiswords app just with games included, making it essentially Nintendo Badge Arcade without the microtransactions. I believe there were some collectible OKKO figures present in that app early on, but they'd become lost media once the app shut down. Aside from that, the series had a few online games too, but I won't go too in-depth with those. Not sure what else I could say about this fantastic series. I'd say it's pretty close to being considered the channel's best show, though regular show had a lot more to offer, despite being a bit more flawed, especially when it comes to episodes revolving around Mordecai's love relationship between Margaret and CJ. OKKO is less flawed in comparison, with only a few episodes I consider weak, but is overall still excellent, though there is a lot to be desired, though that mainly has to do with how Cartoon Network treated the show. Like they refused to greenlit the Hugh Troop spin-off series. OKKO still has a lot of unexplored potential under its belt, and I also have to admit that its universe is a lot more interesting than regular shows. Although it's hard to say goodbye to such a good series like this, KO fought to the end, and more importantly, is my best friend. Thank you for watching the review. So far, Apple and Onion. I can tell that I'm getting pretty near the end of this list because this was around the time I slowly began to stop watching Cartoon Network altogether. This is when Cartoon Network really started to lean towards being a kids channel. I wasn't tuning in as much when this and Craig began airing, though I have seen some episodes from both series. Wouldn't say this is any better than OKKO overall. It's still pretty enjoyable. The series takes place in a city full of diverse food and drink characters, with them being named after their respective food and drinks. The titular characters are no different, being a dorky duo that try to make every day as fun as possible, but more down to earth compared to Phineas and Ferb. They often get themselves in crazy predicaments, like trying to get a duck off their roof so they could save their song they planned for the block party, before their ice cream cake melts and corrupts their computer. Other times they drive people crazy with their quirkiness, like in the bus episode where they get kicked out because Apple needed to pee, or when they tried to spend the day with Falafel and let all his innards fall out. Despite that, they often feel remorse for their actions, and try to make it up in the end too. Not to mention, they often sing a lot too. Can't forget about the Bottle Catch song. Although Cartoon Network acknowledges this show a bit more than OKKO, but not by much, there's not much to say about it due to its simple episodic nature, though the intro changed near the end of the series. The Craig of the Creek franchise. Here is another late-stage era Cartoon Network series, but unlike some of the shows that came before, and majority that came after, this show managed to get a lengthy run, lasting 6 seasons, and being the latest series to ever end. Almost makes me question how this show stuck around for so long, and how it managed to do so, when many of the shows surrounding it can barely make it past 2 seasons. It's also the first Cartoon Network series, in over a decade, to have an African-American protagonist after Class of 3000, which is what I call progressive. It's yet another series with a young boy whose name is on the title, just like Steven and Clarence, though he's accompanied by 2 redhead kids named Kelsey and JP, with one being a genius and the other insane, often exploring parts of the creek inhabited by other children. Craig even having an underground hideout, located in a stump to himself, Kelsey, and JP too. I remember when this got announced, I expected this to be Harvey Beaks but with humans characters, instead. I remember really enjoying Harvey Beaks when I was younger, for the short time it aired on Nickelodeon and later Nicktoons. That series was made by the Chowder creator. Though not as chaotic, it's still pretty charming. Craig of the Creek is somewhat similar. You can pretty much tell this series is the spiritual successor to Clarence, though it's a bit less realistic, though pretty close. I never really watched this show all too often, as I was interested in other stuff, but I recall catching some earlier episodes involving Kelsey searching for a book in a library, Craig being a hoarder, one where they explore the sewers, and the episode where the main trio all get cursed by some lesbian witches, Luz and Amity. Wait, wrong show. In theory, this might seem like a mindless little cartoon to throw on to have your 8-year-old waggle their arms and do the JP, though I believe this series goes much deeper than that, but I've been missing out due to me either focusing on whatever little crumbs of Gumball, We Bare Bears, or OKKO that were airing left pretty early on, or me focusing on the Disney Channel shows that would premiere during its run like Big City Greens, Amphibia, and Molly McGee, or me watching LS Mark's cartoon ranking videos and Scott the Wows episodes. It's weird how this is considered a staple of the network, though I still view it being a bit more recent. Much like how Nickelodeon considers The Loud House a staple, because that's one of the 2 only cartoons they have currently. But it could just be me getting old, I guess. Disney Channel even does this with Big City Greens, despite nobody ever talks about it. The series also premiered right as memes revolving around the infamous Bean Mouth started to appear online, with this series being no exception. I think the show even references older shows that aired on the network, like how the elders mentioned some older shows already ranked here in one episode, and another has Craig wearing an Eduardo mask. I think KO even appears in one episode, as part of an in-universe fighting game roster. Pretty sure there might be some references I missed, and I don't think this was really an important detail of the series at all, but I thought I might still bring it up. This series was popular enough to get a spin-off series targeted to an even younger demographic, much like We Baby Bears, focusing on the adventures of Craig's younger sister Jessica in her Big Little World. Not to be confused with Little Big Planet for PlayStation 3. Like Baby Bears, this series also uses a pastel color palette. Again, I'm not really a fan of Cartoon Network trying to target preschoolers, as I think the network works better for people of all ages. Overall, Craig of the Creek isn't my absolute favorite CN series in the world, but I thought it was a good little show from what I saw, and I don't think the Jessica spin-off really dips it down a bit either, so I'm placing it at a reasonable place in the ranking. Summer Camp Island. A cutesy little show that happened to air on Cartoon Network, which I felt like it's kind of out of place. This feels more like something you'd see on Nick Jr. It premiered during summer 2018, or what Cartoon Network considered their best summer ever to be, though I just ignored it because I don't think it's really that important of a show. Again, this was when I watched Cartoon Network less often, so I never really had the chance to watch this series. It's the first series that moved over to HBO Max for premieres, and the only one to return to the main network. I got nothing else to say. Victor and Valentino. As you can probably tell, I have less to say about the shows, due to me not watching as much Cartoon Network as I used to. This series has the typical 2010s Cartoon Network art style too. The series follows the titular characters who find Latino mythology fascinating, with a lot of it being real and causing chaos, regular show style, only not as good. The dynamic of the titular characters are even similar to that of regular shows, only not as good, with Victor being Rigby, and Valentino being Mordecai. Then there's Charlene, who has a creepy obsession with Victor. If there's anything I could describe this series as, it's a mixture between Gravity Falls and DuckTales 2017 with The Book of Life and Coco. Mau Mau Heroes of Pure Heart. We've went nearly a decade without a one-season wonder, yet here's another one. Just comes to show how Cartoon Network really fell off at the end of this decade, though I wouldn't really saw this show as any bad. It's created by Parker Simmons, who previously worked on OKKO, and I think this series really wanted to be another OKKO really badly, though it's more fantasy-focused with every character being an animal. I wouldn't say it's just as good as OKKO, but if I squint really hardly, I'd mistake this for Lego Monkey Kid. This series was also meant to get greenlit for a second season, but that never came to be, as it's been over 5 years since the series aired an episode. Infinity Train, yet another mistreated Cartoon Network series, which is apparently the norm at this point. I think it's the first series in a long while to be rated TV PG, though I also think it's the last one, in terms of this ranking. This series contains a lot more mature themes compared to other shows airing at the time. Each season is considered to be a book, which Nickelodeon's Avatar franchise, not to be confused with the Avatar movies, also does. Each book follows a different protagonist, though I've only watched the first one with Tulip. The first 2 seasons aired on the network proper, but apparently its content was too dark for children, so it was moved to HBO Max, where the last 2 seasons were dropped before getting purged off the face of the earth. Expect the next couple of shows to experience the same fate. The Fungies. The Furman is the first Cartoon Network series to start off primarily as an HBO Max original, before airing on the network itself for a brief period of time. Basically, this series is a slice-of-life Smurfs knockoff that feels like a parody that Clarence or Jessica, Craig's little sister who I mentioned previously getting her own spin-off, would watch. There's not a lot to say about this show, other than it being another victim of the infamous 2022 purge. Tig N Seek. I'm not surprised if you've never heard of this or the previous series, because HBO Max did a horrible job at advertising them. Like with the Fungies, this did eventually air on Cartoon Network itself for a brief period of time too. If the last series gave off Clarence vibes, this series gives off Uncle Grandpa vibes with a pinch of Gumball. It follows a kid detective and his cat doing wacky stuff, and that's basically the entire premise. It's not one of my personal favorites, and its art style feels like a stereotypical take on what most 2010s Cartoon Network shows looked like, similarly to the Powerpuff Girls reboot, but nowhere near as awful. Elliot from Earth. Here we have the first series to be made by Cartoon Network Studios Europe, or as it's now called, Hanna-Barbera Europe. That isn't Gumball. It follows a kid and his dinosaur going on adventures through space or something. You can tell by this point I stopped caring for whatever Cartoon Network was putting out, and even the network itself was like that too, as they stopped caring for these newer shows, which is why a lot of the more recent stuff are shorter-lived, with Craig being the exception. The Heroic Quest of the Valiant Prince Ivandoe. Here we have the last major Cartoon Network original series, and yet it's another CN Studios Europe series. Interestingly enough, these started off as shorts that were exclusive to European countries, starting in 2017, before getting picked up as a full series just 5 years later, with it debuting on USCN in 2023. Currently, this is the only ongoing series on this list, but I'm not exactly sure when this series will end. But we finally reached the end. Cartoon Network sure had its ups and downs over the years, though a lot of these shows are consistently good, especially when compared to what Nickelodeon or Disney XD was putting out. However, there's bound to be quite a few duds here and there. Its 2010s lineup of shows are some of my favorites of all time, but it's a shame they couldn't carry that success into this decade, due to its parent companies constantly going through mergers, as well as the rise of indie cartoons like Chick Nugget or The Amazing Digital Circus that are easier to access compared to CN shows. To top things off, here's how I would personally rank every CN original series ever.